She's worked for the ABC and SBS and has appeared on many different programs, including Celebrity MasterChef on Channel 10. And she's also an ambassador for the National Year of Reading. In 2012, Indira won the Lifestyle Award from InStyle magazine for her food activism work. Indira is passionate about growing her own produce and creating delicious meals with the bounty from her balcony. So without further ado, please welcome Indira Naidoo.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that lovely introduction, and it's so wonderful to be here in Campsie. I have to admit, and I'm very embarrassed I have to admit this, I've never been to Campsie before. So this is my first trip here, and before I came, I walked quickly down the main street and obviously immediately just fell in love with all those food stores, vegetable stores, goat curry for $18, goat meat in the butcher, and I went, yes, I'm definitely coming back here. So that's been one of the really wonderful things about writing my first book, is that I've been travelling to the most amazing parts of the city and the country, and going to lots of places for the first time that shouldn't have been for the first time. So it's made me, I think, a bit more appreciative of the wider community that I live in. So that's been a pleasant sort of side effect of doing the book. For those of you old enough to remember me when I used to present the news on SBS, it may seem slightly unusual why a woman who, you see on a television box and manicured and hair and makeup suddenly turns to putting her hands in compost and manure in a garden, and how that change actually happened. So maybe if I just explain to you, that was 12 years ago. Again, a lot of people wouldn't realise it's been that long since I hosted the news on SBS. I've done some television work since then, but mostly my work has actually been in consumer and food activism. And that was a very gradual process, and I think for most of us there are these different moments in our life where suddenly the penny drops and you realise, why am I doing what I'm doing, and why, I want to be more involved in something slightly different to where my work currently is. And after I'd spent a number of years at SBS, I realised that I was reporting on world events and reporting on communities and telling people out there what was going on in the world. But because most of my day was spent in the studio, I actually wasn't getting out in the community I was talking about. And more I found that to be very problematic, and I realised that I'd become quite disconnected from what was going on in my community. So I decided to move away from journalism and reconnect with community. And the job I took up was with Choice, the consumer advocacy group, and learnt a lot more about different communities, different issues, and one of the things that just kept resonating was food, and that so many issues and problems that we're all struggling with, whether it's to do with our environment, climate change, sustainability, water resources, obesity, health, it all comes back to food. And after I did a couple of years at Choice, I was then asked to run a global food program with the UN in Geneva, and I spent a year there on and off commuting, very long commute back to Sydney. And it was a really interesting time because that was in about 2008, where we were having huge food shortages around the world. And I'd never really thought about it because Australia's always been a place of plentiful, we've always got lots of food on all our supermarket shelves. And so it hadn't been an issue that had really, connected with me before. But suddenly I was starting to see really concerning images in China, Africa, of supermarkets absolutely with no food, of grain prices soaring so high that people couldn't afford very basic foodstuffs. I came back to Australia, and I was lucky enough to be selected by the former US President, Vice President Al Gore, as one of his climate change trainees. And what that involved is spending some time with Mr. Gore in Melbourne and about 250 other trainees. And we learnt through lots of other scientists and specialists in the area about climate and what was happening. And this was in 2009. And we were encouraged then to go back into the community and talk about, what we'd learnt about the issues about climate change. And sadly, what happened just after I was trained, actually, Malcolm Turnbull was rolled, Kevin Rudd was deposed, and Copenhagen sort of fell apart and didn't deliver what we were expected. So it was, and people started to get very polarised about climate change, as we still are now. But in 2009, both parties absolutely agreed that climate change was real, it was caused by humans, or they contributed to it. So what I was experiencing in the community was all this volatility and all this aggression and all this nastiness, and it was really polarising. And I realised that people were not listening about the issues because they were immediately already deciding I believe or I don't believe, or this is wrong, that's right. And so as a communicator who was going into the community, I was trying to think of a better, less hostile way to talk about the issues of climate. And I was in this sort of frame of mind when I went to my local farmers market, and I was, just doing my local shopping, and one of the stallholders gave me a tomato to try, and I popped it in my mouth and carried on walking. But it was, as I talk about it in my book, it was just the most amazing flavour explosion. It was the most delicious tomato I've ever remembered eating. It was, this crunchy, sweet skin, and it was just juicy and delicious inside. I rushed back to the stallholder and I said to him, "Where'd you get that tomato? I try to always, buy organic tomatoes or whatever, but they don't taste like that." And he said, "This particular tomato, I grow it myself. And it's delicious because it's a very rare heirloom tomato that you can't buy commercially very often." And I went, "Oh, because I want to get a whole lot of these. These are the only tomatoes I'm going to eat for the rest of my life." And he said, "Well, if that's what you want to do, you're going to have to grow some yourself because no one's growing them in quantities." And I went, "Well, I can't grow any myself. I live in Potts Point in an apartment on a balcony on the 13th floor in the middle of a metropolis. Hello, there's no way I can grow tomatoes." And he said, "Well, how big's your balcony?" And I said, "About 20 square metres. Do you get some sunlight?" And I said, "Yeah, I get quite a bit of north-facing sunlight." And he said, "Easy. You could easily grow tomatoes." And I said, "But I don't garden. I don't know nothing about it." And he said, "Try it." And I walked away thinking, he's nuts, I'm not going to do that. But I have to admit, the foodie in me, I took those tomatoes home and I made this amazing pasta sauce with basil and garlic and chilli and those tomatoes, just tossed it through some fettuccine, and it was the most delicious pasta I'd ever had. And the foodie in me is really what drove out the gardener in me, because I just went, I've got to have those tomatoes again. Damn it, that means I'm going to have to try to grow some myself. And that's how it started. And my poor husband, the next morning I said to him, "Look, our lovely little pristine balcony, and we've got the perfect little this and the barbecue and the deck chairs. I'm just going to bring in a bit of soil and a couple of pots. It won't be messy at all. It'll all be fine." He absolutely thought I'd flipped and some, another crazy idea that I wasn't going to finish or something like that. And I did, and he said, "Do some research and come back to me. I want to see a plan," and all this sort of stuff. So I did. And I guess he just couldn't find any reasons to stop me. So he said, "Okay, that little corner, you can start there. Let's see how it goes." And that little corner spread and spread. And during that first year, when I started writing a food blog called Sauce the Onion, which I still write, I grew 43 different herbs and vegetables. It expanded from the tomatoes. It moved into potatoes and radishes and eggplants and lettuces and lemons and strawberries and zucchini. There was basically nothing that you couldn't grow in the ground that I didn't grow or attempt to grow on the balcony. And what really shocked me is, other than the garlic and the broccoli, which failed for various reasons, I was really successful. And all up in that first year, I was able to grow 70 kilos of produce from my balcony. Not having any experience gardening before, growing everything in pots, and also, more importantly, because like a lot of people, very busy urban professional, I'm rushing around doing my, busy little life stuff. I didn't want it to take up a lot of my time, so I only set aside 10 minutes a day. And that was part of the whole plan, was that could I manage this, wouldn't juggle everything else in my life, because I'd always thought, like a lot of people, the gardening just takes over your life, and so I didn't want to be a slave to the garden. And I wasn't. It was literally 10 minutes a day. And what I found, though, is I was having so much fun, particularly as I started to get successful and grow things, that I wanted to spend more time in my garden. And I found that I was making excuses to my friends, so they'd say, "Come on, let's go to the bar and have a drink." And I'd go, "Oh, no, I've got to do this." But really, I just wanted to hang out and stick my hands in the pots of poo, and it was quite crazy. And I started to become really into it. And even though it started as this little experiment, I suddenly realised after a while, oh my God, this could be something that really can cross that climate change polarising debate that we're having. Because when people garden, they're not thinking about climate change and environment, sustainability and all that sort of stuff. They're just thinking, oh, here's a seed and now here's a vegetable, you know. But really, that's what they're engaging with without really realising it. So I thought I discovered a way to talk about some of these more complex ideas in a way that everyone can connect to. So I went to a publisher and I said, this is my crazy idea. I want to turn it into a book as a guide for first-time gardeners or gardeners who now have small spaces in the city, to show them that it is possible and remarkably productively possible as well. And fortunately, I found an equally crazy publisher who went, love the idea. Yeah, I think that's going to really go off. So this was 2009. And we started, you know, I started planting things, and in my book I talk about all the different seasons, what I grew, what worked, what didn't work, the soil I used, the pots, everything that I was experimenting with. Because the other thing, having a small space garden, is that the designs of growing, you know, pots were not necessarily suitable to a balcony, a small space. So I had to spend some time finding the right equipment. I grew things on my wall as well. I've got a friend who was designing a vertical wall system, and it's a, you know, fantastic unit, which it's not commercially available yet. But I grew 20 shallow-rooted herbs and vegetables on my wall as well, because it was a sunny wall, and I thought the great thing about small spaces can be that you've got all these unused vertical spaces as well. So I thought, well, why not use them? Let me find it. So it's on page 140. But you can see that was the unit I grew. And that was really successful. So I grew lots of herbs, lettuces, spinach, sorrel. He does, yeah. They call it. I talk about it there. It's called an ecovert, but also, as I talk about, you don't have to have, you know, a sort of a high-tech plastic, you know, recycled plastic professional system. You can use a lattice system with hooks and hanging pots as well. It's more understanding that concept that don't just think of gardening as in the ground or flat, you know, using hanging baskets, grow things over your roofs and ceilings, on your walls. There's lots of ways to grow. Plants, as I discovered, are extraordinary. They will almost grow anywhere, given a little bit of sunlight. So that's how I was able to maximise my crop in such a small 20 square metre space, is that I used all the spaces in my balcony. And the other thing, which was, you know, part of the journey for me, so intellectually, you know, I was there understanding we need to reconnect with our food, eat healthily. Everything I grew was organic. I didn't use any pesticides or herbicides. But again, I was still very much an inner city type chick, you know, terrified of bugs and insects and whatever, and, you know, always had the can of Mortein nearby to stomp things and kill things. And as I started reading more, obviously, about all the effects of chemicals in our environment and the effect that that was going to have on my food, I started to realise, oh, I've got to really be careful about all the chemicals around me. I can't keep using these things. And not only that, some of these bugs are really good bugs to have on my balcony. And even something like, you know, again, petrified of spiders, but a spider is there with their webs catching the aphids, and they're helping you do your job as a gardener. So I started, you know, this new adventure about discovering insects, I guess, and connecting with them. And one of the really beautiful stories was when I was growing my zucchini flowers, again, as someone who'd never grown zucchini, so I had no idea that this was going to be a problem. The flowers started to come out, and that was all fine, but they weren't turning into zucchinis, and I didn't really know why. Did a bit more reading and research and discovered that there are male and female flowers, and you need to, you know, get some of the male pollen to the female flower and cross-pollinate it, and that's how you get the zucchini. Now, I didn't have any pollinators coming up onto my balcony. I didn't have hoverflies or bees or anything, and that's why they weren't picking up the pollen and moving it around. So one of the tips that I came across was using a paintbrush, and you sort of do your own IVF, you know. So you put the paintbrush in one flower and pick up pollen, and then put it in the other flower, and I was going, God. But I was so desperate for those zucchinis to come out, you know, big and juicy. Honestly, I was sitting there and I'd crouch and I'd do it every morning. And then after a couple of weeks of this, I went, this is ridiculous. You know, there must be a better way of doing this. And then I, you know, thought, I've got to try to attract pollinators to my balcony. Now, I was stung by a bee when I was 7, allergic to bees, always been petrified of them, like a lot of urban dwellers. See a bee, it's like, and because I hadn't seen a bee on my balcony all the time we'd lived there, 14 years, I thought that was a really good thing, because then there was one insect less that I had to worry about trying to kill and stomp out. And so it was quite funny, and my husband found it hilarious that now here I was trying to attract bees to come and help me pollinate my fruit and flowers. So I did again some reading and found that, you know, bees obviously love any flowers that have lovely nectars and things like that. And the one they absolutely love is this beautiful 5-pointed purple flower called the borage flower. Don't know if anyone has heard of the borage flower. And that's what it looks like. Have you seen those? And I use them in the pavlova recipe. And the wonderful thing about these borage flowers is not only do bees absolutely adore them, but the flowers are sugary and edible, so you can use them in cake cooking and desserts. And the stalks, because it grows on these long stalks, thick stalks, are like asparagus. And you can chop them up and stir-fry them, and absolutely delicious. So borage, wow, on so many levels, was just like my favourite probably plant on the balcony. So I planted these seeds in. I'm very, very sceptical, like a journalist, going, as if one little flower on the 13th floor in Potts Point is going to get me some bees. Like, I've never seen any bees in Potts Point. There's no way. Anyway, but I thought I'll just try it out. So on the morning where I had my big bud and I could tell it was just about to open, the first borage flower, got my camera, was really close to the plant, waiting for the bee to arrive, you know, thinking, there's no way the bee's coming. And I waited there for an hour or two. The flower opened up, you know, with the sun, and it was a pretty flower, absolutely gorgeous, but still no sign of any bees. Went and had some breakfast, came back out, and I saw this sort of dark thing sort of hovering around the flower. Went in close and went, oh my God, it's a bee. I couldn't believe it. And it overcame my fear. I was just so joyous that there was a bee on my balcony. I went in, got some photos, and completely fearless. It was this amazing moment where I just was filled with joy to see a bee. And this little bee was so cute. It would just go in and out of this flower, and all the little pollen grains would stick to the back of its legs, and it came back at sunset, the same little bee, I'm assuming. And then for the next couple of weeks, this little bee would come at sunrise and sunset, dust to my borage flowers, and just had such a great time. And it was just so exciting, and I really looked forward to seeing my bee. Like, he became like this pet. And then after a few months, I put in a few more borage flowers, and more bees started coming. And, you know, there were at times there was like a bit of a buzz, you know, like I'd go out there and they'll buzz, you know. And it was just this extraordinary discovery that somehow the bees had found these borage flowers, and that, the wonderful thing is they started doing all the pollinating work for me. So suddenly all my fruit and veggies were just getting so much more productive, and fruit and things on them. And these little bees were just, you know, my little helpers. So my relationship to bees have changed so amazingly from the terrified, you know, they're going to kill and sting me and all this sort of stuff, to the extent now, again, which my husband finds hilarious, I've joined the New South Wales Amateur Beekeeping Society. And I'm learning all about how to keep bees. Not that I can keep bees on the balcony, but I'm learning all about, you know, there's a couple of issues, particularly now at the moment, with a couple of viruses that bees communities are being killed by, the Varroa virus, the colony collapse virus. And it's such a big problem now in the world that America has lost something like a third of its bee stock, which is devastating because, and we're actually exporting Australian bees that haven't been infected by these viruses to repopulate their hives. And it's devastating because, again, as I discovered through my little balcony experiment, there are a number of crops that actually can't grow or be pollinated by anything else other than a bee. So there was a really interesting story in China, out of China last week, where all their almond plantations, almonds, for instance, are one of the few crops that can only be pollinated by bees. And no other insect can get into the flower, and I'm not exactly sure the technicalities. And there are no bees in China, in this particular area, in this province. Their bee communities have also been decimated. So the Chinese farmers have sort of put feathers on sticks, and they're reaching up into all these trees, hand pollinating, you know, thousands and thousands of flowers, because there's no bees coming to do the work for them. And the really scary thing is this has caused huge collapse of lots of food crops in America and China over this spring and summer. And it's raised prices of a lot of crops. So canola and almond particularly, all the prices have gone up because bees are dying off at the numbers they are. And the really scary statistic that I came across is that we are so reliant on bees, but don't even think about it. Like, it should be the conversation we're having all the time. I mean, it almost is the conversation I'm having every day, everywhere. It's like, I can't tell enough people about this, because once bees die out, and the way we're going, they will die out, because we're not doing anything to protect them and stop the spread of these viruses. We will be dead in 2 years. That's how reliant we are on bees for our food crops. If they're not around, our food crops die, we die. 2 years after they've gone, we've gone. I mean, it was just so frightening, that statistic. And it's not sort of front and centre of our sort of debates and discussions. So one of the things that I'm involved in is trying to repopulate our bee communities. So I'm trying to put more hives, particularly in our cities. And one of the hives that I've been involved in establishing is at the Wayside Chapel, which is a crisis centre for homeless people in Potts Point, just a couple of streets where I live, actually. We've got a beautiful, you'll have to come and see it, most beautiful 200 square vegetable garden on the roof. We're growing 80 herbs and vegetables, and everything that we're growing and harvesting, and it's all being run by the homeless visitors who come. We harvest and use in the cafe downstairs, and we have cooking classes and, how to live, self-sufficiently classes for our homeless visitors. But we had a beehive put in 3 weeks ago, and that was so exciting, because we'll have honey coming out of that hive by about November, early December, which we can also use, in the cafe and in the cooking classes. And it's so exciting because what I've noticed, just being 2 streets away from the Wayside hive, I'm starting to get more bees coming on my balcony. So on the weekend, because it's spring and everyone's now thinking about what am I going to grow, and flowers and plants and things, even though I, still want to make sure everything that mainly grows on my balcony is edible for me, it's mainly my priority. Now I'm thinking, what's going to attract more bees, And so my real challenge was going out and finding more flowers, and I put a huge jasmine, plant in, because, that attracts lots of bees. So I really, am much more engaged now with that space being also a bee attractant space, as well as a space that can grow some, fresh food for my family as well. So again, a small little balcony has taken me on this amazing journey and discovery and awareness. And the other thing that I had installed a couple of weeks ago was a worm farm. Some of you may already have worm farms. And that's just been extraordinary. Like, again, I couldn't remember the last time I would have touched a worm, maybe, when I was a little kid, basically. And now I've got my hands in the worm farm every morning, playing with my worms, like they've become pets of mine, really enjoying feeding them different things, what they like and what they don't like. They really love potato peels and pumpkin, they love eggshells and coffee grounds as well. And just to see them thrive and grow, and, and then they make all this delicious worm wee, which is a wonderful fertiliser for all my plants. And then all my dead leaves and plants, I put back into the worm farm. So it's this wonderful self-sustaining model, again, on a little space in a little balcony. And then my sort of next nutty idea, and my poor husband by now, he's just given up, basically. He's going, whatever, do whatever. So my next nutty idea, because you can't have chickens, obviously, on a balcony because it's a bit too small. But one day I'm hoping I will be able to. But in the interim, I was doing some research about, what sort of animals I could keep on a balcony for food. And I found this amazing Japanese quail. And I don't know if anyone's seen these Japanese quails. They're tiny. They're as big as like a little, canary. And they're grey and white and fluffy, and they're so adorable. And they make up to 14 quail eggs a week. And you just have to keep them in a little hutch, as you would for a rabbit or a guinea pig. They don't like moving around or walking around. They just need a dust bath every couple of days, and that's it. And then their poo also, drops out of the cage and use that as fertiliser. And you get eggs, and they don't take up much room. So that's my next thing I'm going to try to get in there, is a little quail farm. Why not? So I guess that's been the real delight of this adventure for me, is that you just start expanding your mind and start looking at spaces so differently. And from my balcony on the 13th floor, especially in somewhere like Potts Point, where there are thousands of balconies like mine, and rooftops and terraces, all empty and grey and concrete, reflecting the light. They could be absorbing that free sun, making food. I want to see lemon groves. I want to see cages of Japanese quail. I don't know. I mean, I just think that we should, use our spaces so much more differently than we do. And, and the real seriousness of it is that we are losing our agricultural space in Australia because of climate change. We lose 2% of our agricultural land every year. So we're losing the space. We've got to find more space to grow our food. Where is that going to be? We're largely a desert. We're going to have to look at our cities differently there. We're going to have to grow more of our food in our cities. And we're going to have to get and rediscover the skills about how to grow our own food as well. Because it's not difficult. Honestly, if I can do it, anyone can do it. It's not difficult. But it's more just about that changing the mindset of thinking, I'll just go to the supermarket to get my eggplant. No, grow some, just change it, and realising that how productive those small spaces can be. You don't need a lot of room, to do your growing in. And the wonderful thing also for me has been, again, a side effect is how it's grown community in my community. So, for instance, of course, some of you with balconies and small spaces will have issues with your neighbours, because a lot of that was what my husband was really worried about. Oh, they'll be complaining about the smell of the compost and the water flow and all this sort of stuff, and I'm not going to deal with the neighbours. And I said, don't worry, I'll deal with it. I'll make sure they know what's going on. And again, with a garden, it's really hard to contain it. There are going to be dead leaves that will fall over, and there's not much you can do really about it, even if I try to keep it as neat as possible. But this one morning, I was doing some watering and some dead tomato leaves sort of fell over the balcony. And I didn't think anything of it because it was a windy day and there were lots of other leaves flying around, so I didn't think anything of it. And then I just heard this voice booming from down low, didn't identify itself, saying, "Stop throwing rubbish into my balcony." And I'm going, oops, sorry. And then I was really petrified then of, anything that was falling over and I didn't even know who this person was. It carried on watering. And so it was quite windy, so more leaves fell over. And then he goes, stop it, otherwise I'm going to have to, come up and complain or do something. And he was getting a bit threatening, and I'm going, it's just a couple of leaves, it's not even rubbish, But then I was thinking, look, fair enough, if you don't want a dead leaf on your balcony, it's your right not to have that. I can't, I can't be offended by that. And then the next morning, this same voice, while I was out there doing some watering, said, I'm getting some spray from your water. It was hardly anything, because I'm very lucky my balcony is completely enclosed and I've got a drain, so no water goes over the side, so I'm lucky, so I don't have those issues with my neighbours. But obviously now this guy had got a bee in his bonnet, one of my bees probably, and he was just determined just to make it, really uncomfortable for me to go out and enjoy my garden and look after it. And I went, this can't carry on because it's going to upset me too much. I'm thinking, how am I going to deal with this? And at the time we were shooting for the book, and I was filming the carrot cake in the book, and we'd photographed it and harvested the carrots, which is a pretty amazing shot in itself, because that's when I really felt like Farmer Naidoo with the carrots. The carrots actually came out of the pot. And how beautiful are they? Like, they're real. They're not stunted carrots. I really grew those. They came out of the pot. It's pretty amazing. And with those carrots, I cooked this really delicious carrot cake. It's an absolute killer, really, really lovely, thick cream cheese icing. And I thought, I've got all this leftover carrot cake. Quite good to use as a little bit of a bribe. So I took it down to my concierge in my building and left a little note, and I didn't even know this gentleman's name, but I knew a number because it was right under mine, and just left a note, I'm very sorry about the rubbish that's fallen on your balcony. Please accept this as a peace offering, and it's been made using carrots that grew on the balcony above you. So I left it with my concierge, and the next day when I came back from work, I said to Daryl, so, what happened? And he goes, oh, yeah, that guy, he picked up the carrot cake and everything, and he saw it, he goes, what's that? And I explained, and he goes, oh, I don't eat cake. And I said to Daryl, oh, no, so he didn't take it? And he goes, no, he took it. But I haven't heard back from him, so I don't know what's happened. I went, oh, gosh, this is going to be a really hard nut to crack, this guy. And the next day, I came downstairs and there was a note in my letterbox, And as soon as I saw it, I went, oh no, he's going to take me to some tribunal and there's going to be strata committee issues. And the note was this lovely note actually saying, thank you so much for the carrot cake. It was delicious. I had no idea you were growing vegetables up there. I'd love to come and look at it sometime. And I went, oh my God, thank God. And so Jeffrey came up and took a look at my plants and was just so blown away, he started growing things on his balcony. And I sort of quite love that story about how I sort of used a situation that in lots of community environments can turn toxic for silly reasons, and just try to think it through into how I can engage this person rather than, you know, start a fight. And what's been lovely now, we've got about 8 different apartments, because everyone in my building basically has the same a balcony facing the same way. So it makes sense. They can do exactly what I do. And they're all growing now. And we have this lovely little collective, the concierge gets a bit annoyed, but people leave things at the front desk. You know, they've got a little sprig of something that they've got too much of, some oregano in time, and people can pick it up. And it's like our little market garden on the concierge desk. I left some lemons there yesterday, you know, and it's so lovely. And we've got this little exchange of food that's just come from our balcony. And the residents that are not into it honestly think we are so nutty. Like, they just go, oh, those crazy women have got too much time on their hands, clearly, you know, or whatever. But it's just been a lovely way for all of us to get to know each other. We've been able to come together as a group. We've introduced green waste recycling in our building. So for all the compost and soil that before was very difficult for me to get rid of because there was nowhere really for me to dump it in my our garbage room, now we've got a special bin that's for all our, you know, compost and used soil, and that gets taken away and recycled and used better than just being thrown into a skip bin. So you know, now we're getting really excited. We want to put solar panels on our, you know, our roof in our building. I mean, why not? So and because there's a group of us now and we're all sort of like-minded, it's made it all, you know, much more easier. So yeah, so the lovely community that's built up around it has probably actually been the more important thing for me, because in the end, all these issues that I've been talking about tonight really requires community coming together and you making the decision what sort of food you want to have in your community, how you want it grown, how it's going to be treated with whatever. So that's why I think community is really what's going to drive this change and you know, drive a rethinking about how we are growing food, because it is just going to get more and more difficult every year now to get food. And we've already seen, you know, rising grocery prices in Australia. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. So yeah, so you know, I hope that through people growing their own little bit in a little pot, and you don't have to go crazy like I did and grow, you know, all those vegetables. Even if you just do a pot of herbs, that's all you have time for, a room or the confidence to, it makes such a difference, because that pot of herbs, if you're growing, you know, your own basil pot, that is something that you're growing yourself, so it's not requiring transportation, food miles to be flown in and trucked in and wherever it's come from, not requiring water and hot housing and glass houses and all that, you know, waste of energy. And the most important thing, you're only using what you need when you need it. So that's another big problem with so many of those packaged herbs, is you buy a big bunch and you just want a little bit for your casserole or your curry or whatever, and then the rest of it, what do you do with it? You put it in the fridge and then it goes black and it gets soggy, throw it in the bin. You know all about it, right? And then it ends up in landfill. So it causes another problem. And you sort of go, if you just had the pot of herbs, all that cycle just completely stops. So, you know, that's what I recommend. Just start simply, if you're, you know, a nervous first-time gardener, with a little pot of herbs. Get comfortable and confident, and then slowly move into the bigger, more difficult vegetables and greens after that. Because that's another mistake new-time gardeners make, is that they just go to the garden centre and go crazy, and they just buy lots of pots and lots of soil and lots of seedlings, and then go, oh my God, I had no idea. Oh, I hadn't really thought about it. Starting small is really good, and getting to know what your plants want rather than what you think they want is also really important, because while most of them require the similar sorts of things, there are little nuanced things, like some may require more nitrogen to get green and leafy, some may need more potassium for flowers, others, you know, one of my most difficult ones, I have to admit, it's been my lemon tree, because a lot of people say growing lemons in a pot can be problematic, and yeah, it didn't do well for the first 2 years, and then this spring, winter, summer, yeah, it's just gone off crazy. It's just been fantastic. And that's because I've just been watching it and seeing what it needs. And, you know, because a lot of times you can kill things with kindness as well. And you think, I'll give it more water and I'll give it more fertiliser. But sometimes it's terrible. So, so it's just been such an exciting adventure on so many levels. I really think that moment when I had that first tomato really did, as I say in the book, you know, change my life in a lot of ways, because I'm doing these talks and demonstrations now around the country, 4 or 5 a week. I'm going to schools and libraries, retirement villages, gardening clubs. I talked to Barclays Bank on Friday, to a group of women investment bankers who want to put some herbs on one of their terraces. And I'm going, wow, this is amazing, that's fantastic. But it wasn't a group that I was expecting to, you know, be connected with these ideas. And I think that that's what's been so heartening, is that it's across the board. People are starting to ask these questions in very different walks of life. And I think that that's, you know, very encouraging, because that's what it's going to take, you know, to make some of these changes happen. Yeah, so thank you very much. That's the end.